I don't think we're tough enough for this.
I have no gun.
I am not stripping again.
Nuts.
Hello, welcome to iFanboy, your weekly comic book discussion show. My name is Connor Kilpatrick, and I'm here with Josh Flanagan.
I don't get to say it.
No.
You're lucky I didn't have 5
I get to say it. I'm Ron Richards, and this week we want to take a look at the career of one of probably the modern age's biggest stars. If you take a look back at comics of the past 30 years, there's several names that jump out, like Alan Moore, but also Frank Miller.
He's certainly one of the most important creators.
Yep.
Despite his recent output or recent reputation, if you look back on his career, he is one of the most important creators.
Well, yeah, there's a 20-year run there where he defined grim and gritty comics.
He defined a whole era. With long
Well, modern comics are defined from 1986 forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding what happened in the 90s. But it's still a line, and when you talk about 1986, you're basically talking
He's
about...
right there in the middle.
You're talking about Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen.
Yep.
Those are the books that changed everything.
Yep.
But before that, there was a lot of stuff that led up to it, and there's stuff that came after that.
And also, if you take a look at the creator rights movement and creator-owned books, Frank Miller is at the forefront of that. Mm-hmm. I mean, from a writing perspective, from an art perspective, from a business perspective, he is one of the most important creators of the past 30 years.
Easily.
So,
shaping the way that what you get today.
So we felt it deserves our attention.
Yes.
And he's also one of, I don't know how you guys feel about him.
I'm a
huge fan of him. I mean, you're probably...
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Of course
I know, yeah.
Seriously, who's going to be like, you guys
Yeah.
are good. Like, come on, if you do that, you're a dick.
Right, yeah. You're just being contrarian.
Yes.
And then nobody likes that. I don't know what that means.
That's your joke.
Anyway, I really don't. But anyway, so Frank Miller, you may not be aware, but Frank Miller's first work was actually, he rose to stardom pretty quickly. Like, if you look at his arc, his first work was in 1978. Where he worked on the Twilight Zone TV adaptation of comics. He did a couple issues there.
He came from Vermont.
Yeah, there you go. It sounds like he came from Vermont.
You don't think you think of all of Frank Miller's work, and you think it's going to be he's some edgy guy. He came from the city. No, Vermont. Yeah. There's no edgy city streets in Vermont.
Well, he came from New York.
The slums of Montpelier. They don't exist.
Your obsession with New England. Anyway, so he came to New York seeking work and seeking to become an artist. He did some work with Twilight Zone. That led to a couple of interviews at DC, where actually, of all people, Vinnie Coletta was art director at the time and was doing the talent searching.
Give me that. No.
Yeah.
No.
2 lines.
No.
And Vinnie Coletta saw something in him, which led to him getting a series of 1 to 6-pager war stories.
It's almost a force of will story. Like, he basically shows them to DC and says, hey, I did these comics, give me some work.
Yep.
And they were like, And then
first Joe Orlando was like, no, kid. And then Vinnie Coletta was like, all right, kid, I'll take care of you. So he did some work at DC, and that actually led to him becoming, present in the scene, and that's where he went across the street to Marvel and started working for Jim Shooter, who was editor-in-chief at the time. Actually what happened was he was doing covers and fill-ins and stuff like that, and he actually filled in on Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man number 2728, which guest starred Daredevil.
Ooh.
Yep, and sure enough, Miller was like, "This Daredevil guy's pretty cool." And actually went to Jim Shooter, was like, "Can I do Daredevil?" And they're like, "Oh, okay."
Again, like basically imposing his will, saying, "I would like to do Daredevil, please."
And it happened to be at the time that Gene Colan was leaving Daredevil, and so in 1979, Jim Shooter made Frank Miller the ongoing artist on Daredevil, which led to what is now considered an epic run.
And people should keep in mind that, again, much like we'll talk about Batman a little bit later, Daredevil then wasn't Daredevil now.
No, yeah.
So what you have then is a character who's not at all the way he's seen now, which is all Miller's doing. So this is the beginning of him.
Yeah, that's actually true. I mean, the Daredevil that we've gotten since Miller was on it is Miller's Daredevil. Yeah. It's just them telling the same story over and over
again. Yeah.
So at first he wasn't writing Daredevil. He was just the artist. So that's important. Yeah. And it's funny when
Name the writer.
When you look at
Stuart Sutcliffe.
Keep best.
Roger McKenzie.
Ooh.
Where are they now?
Richard Pellington?
Yeah, issue number 158 was his
Michael
first.
Pennington.
Issue 158 was his
but
first.
Only 2 years later, he's now the writer and the artist in the book.
Yeah.
And so now he really gets to impose his will on what he thinks Daredevil's story should be.
And sure enough, Daredevil 168, his first issue that he writes, is the first appearance of ELEKTRA. And you start seeing the pieces of the Daredevil BULLSEYE ELEKTRA epic yarn that he was telling.
Yeah. But at this point, he's still not a huge star. The book is still not huge.
And also, when you look back at that work, that stuff, like, it doesn't look like Frank Miller as you know.
No, it's very traditional.
His art arc is he's had an arc.
Yeah.
Style.
Yeah.
But he's not a star. What makes him a star, Ron?
Wolverine. This is an old copy. The Wolverine miniseries in 1982 that he co-plotted with Chris Claremont, and Chris Claremont wrote, and that he did the art for, this is what catapulted him to superstardom, and also catapulted Wolverine.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And it's a tale of Wolverine going to Japan, and so this is really the first instance where we see Frank Miller. I was going to say Mark Miller. We see Frank Miller evolve his art style to more manga-influenced Eastern kind of art, which is what we know now.
But even still, the art is so different. I like showing this to people who only know modern Sin City Frank Miller.
Yeah.
I mean, the very first shot, it's
pretty traditional.
It's
yeah.
very traditional.
Yeah, but you still see Frank Miller in there.
No, you absolutely can.
And I think that if you look at the interiors
so
of
the
that,
fight scenes especially, a lot of shadowy work.
Yeah, but look at the interiors of that opposed to even the cover on that particular one. That's more like modern Frank Miller. It's a little more stylistic as opposed to realistic.
A heavy line.
Yeah. And so you talk about stylistic and that style as he's evolving. So now he's a superstar at Marvel, and DC's saying, come do whatever you want. And he actually, his next move, so it's like, all right, I just did Wolverine, I'm a big superstar. I'm going to do a create-our-own book called RONIN about samurai in the future. And it's going to look like this. And
this is the absolute edition that DC put out. And it's funny, as you can see, he did new covers. The new style, his current very different style versus the interiors, which is more what you think of when you think of Frank Miller in the 80s.
Yep.
But
I love Frank Miller in the 80s.
Yeah, no, Frank Miller. I read this in college originally.
I did too.
Not when it came out, but read somebody's issues, and it was it was okay.
It's an okay story.
But reading when the Absolute came out, I got the Absolute, and because Frank Miller's art looks great in big size. I really enjoyed it much more reading it all together as an older, more seasoned comic reader.
What I find fascinating, though, is that so it's 1983. Imagine if the internet existed back then.
Yeah.
And after doing
favorite
Daredevil,
writer artist of Daredevil and Wolverine
in this clean style, does his own series, and it's in 1983. It's this.
It's a very different art style than Daredevil.
But it's a very different market then too. And I think that
people would have lost it. They would have.
I'm sure they lost it anyway.
I'm sure, but it still sold.
Yeah.
You know, it was. I mean, obviously, like it's been in print this whole time.
Yeah.
And it's a story
Frank Miller's name has always sold books.
Yeah. It's funny because he can do that. I don't even feel like we have guys like that anymore. If you imagine that say Bendis was like, F this, and he's like, I'm not going to work for Marvel anymore, and he would go to somewhere else and he would do a book and he would sell maybe 10,000 copies.
Right.
Like, there is no Frank Miller like that anymore.
Yeah.
Like, he was an entity.
Yeah. And all this work, so all this leading up, his starting to write Daredevil and his evolving style of Wolverine, evolving style of
But again, before we get to that, you mentioned earlier, creator-owned.
Yeah.
Very early in his career.
Yeah, 1983.
Yeah, so very, very early. He's already...
And from DC.
And he's already going in that route in the mind. That's going to come into play later on.
But so from an art style, it's really important that he takes these steps because then we get to 1986.
Which is when The Dark Knight Returns comes out and blows up.
Well, probably two of his best works on both Batman and Daredevil came out in 1986. The Dark Knight Returns, which we all know about, we've talked about a ton, but also Daredevil Born Again.
Yeah. But Dark Knight Returns redefines the character. I mean, if Daredevil, the Batman you know now, it wasn't the Batman in the 80s. It's a completely different character.
Yeah.
We said with Daredevil, it's true with Batman. They've basically been doing Daredevil and Frank Miller's Batman now for 20 plus years.
I think Batman's been a little more varied because people are the bigger guys are able to come. I think Grant Morrison is one of the first guys to be like, well, okay, hold on,
I'm going to do my thing.
I'm going to kind of do my thing, and he's trying to change it up.
He was really the first one to say we're going to go back to the more lighter tone Batman. Up until Grant Morrison, it's been Frank Miller's Batman.
And here's something else. Like I think people need to. This book, The Dark Knight Returns, is so important to DC Comics today in terms of sales. Like, it's up there with Watchmen. It's this book that is evergreen.
It
keeps selling. It keeps it's in print. And there's a reason for it.
Well, because like Watchmen, you can read it and get over and over and over and find something new in it every time.
Yep. So, but now what I find interesting is that it completely overshadows the other work with Daredevil Born Again, which is just as important because for two reasons. One, Daredevil Born Again, he returns to Daredevil after being off of it for a couple of years, and he's writing, not drawing, so now he's just writing, which is interesting. And he's teamed up with Dave Mazzucchelli, which is going to come up in a little bit. And the story is basically Kingpin destroying Matt Murdock's public and private life as Murdock and Daredevil, which is essentially the same story every other writer's done for the past 20 years.
Yeah, again, it's the same thing. He totally, whatever magic he found in those characters, it was so pure and perfect that every writer's just been doing that for 20 years.
It's funny because when you think about Alan Moore complains about this kind of thing. Frank Miller's got almost more because they are literally doing his stories again. No one's doing Alan Moore's stories again. You know, they're doing his tone, but they're literally doing like, well, what if the Kingpin outs him?
Yeah,
exactly. He destroys his life.
That's a good idea. There's your show. But yeah, so that comes out, and that's just. But what I think is important is that it would not only define the template for the character, but it's also him getting more comfortable in the writing mindset, which I think is we see so many creators come on the scene and start as an artist and then become a writer-artist or just a writer.
People go, oh, the writer's going to write some.
But he's one of the people who has balanced it and has, so you've got him.
He makes people think they can do it.
Yeah, exactly. So he's writing and drawing Dark Knight Returns, but he's writing Daredevil Born Again, and then the next project is he's writing Elektra Assassin with Bill Sienkiewicz doing the art, which is out there art as it is, and writing Batman Year One with Dave Mazzucchelli doing the art.
Well, he's almost. This is Batman Year One, which was not a miniseries. It actually happened in the pages of the Batman series, and it was collected here. He's almost an indie aesthetic in the superhero world. Like he's a pure cartoonist. He writes and draws his own stories, and not a lot of guys can do that.
Well, and I want like Batman Year One. Pretty sure that's my favorite Batman story.
Yeah,
like this
would
be
the simplicity of it. Or?
I love the art. I mean, if you think about it, the guys who are my favorite artists now, Michael Lark,
Samney,
Snaber,
very much
Mazzucchelli.
Yeah, I mean, it's right there. Like it's real, but it's simple.
Have you read Daredevil Born Again?
I actually haven't.
You should check that
out. I definitely want to. But
also, very influential in the current Nolan films.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of all the Batman.
This is the first movie.
Kind of, but the feeling of it is very much.
Yeah.
And like you can I've read this countless times, but I can flip through it right now, and almost more than I can do the same thing with Dark Knight Returns. But like every page, I'm like, oh right, that page, and then this page. Like there's these just endless stuff, and it's this wonderful combination of Mazzucchelli and Miller working together in this harmony that happens every once in a while on special comic books. You know?
So now it's the late 80s, and he is a superstar, and might get a little ahead of himself in terms of his writing chops, and says, I'm going to go give the Hollywood thing a try, and gets caught up in the wonderful science fiction trilogy known as ROBOCOP.
Yeah, he wrote the screenplays for ROBOCOP 2 and 3. I bet you didn't even know there was a 2 and 3.
And I think he worked on ROBOCOP 1. Did he do some? I think he's got some relation to ROBOCOP 1.
I'm not sure about that, but I just know he wrote.
Yeah, but then he did 2. He wrote the scripts of 2 and 3.
And I remember one thing from ROBOCOP, and it's that I'd buy that for $1. That's all that I remember.
The first one's awesome. 2 and 3, I've seen them. They're not.
I have not seen them, so I will not comment.
But that is another seed of an interest of Frank Miller, which we'll get to later on about his interest in movies and outside of comics.
But also, I don't want to lay it on his feet because the process of writing a screenplay is different than writing a comic. A lot of people were involved. He got screwed over.
After you write it, you're handing it in, and you're out of the process if they don't want you. If you are,
So he gets screwed over by Hollywood, and then at the same time thinks he's getting screwed over by DC Comics. Right. And this is where it gets into more of the business side of things. Strong believer in creator-owned, creator rights, creator-owns, and has a dust-up with DC over censorship.
Yep.
There was a big issue in the late 80s where DC Comics wanted to not only adhere to the code, but also put in a rating system, which Frank Miller and several other artists and several other creators interpreted as censorship. And Frank Miller was one of the key guys to stage basically a walkout on DC, like in '89. And he decided to, as opposed to walking across the street to Marvel, he walked across the country to Portland and teamed up with Dark Horse.
Superman did that.
Yeah. And which Dark Horse at the time was a very, very small independent publisher, but was building itself on creator, no censorship, creator rights, all that sort of stuff.
Could you remember that image that was like for the the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, which was like the censorship thing with the little girl in the Band-Aid? Like, that is forever burned in my mind. Like, when I think of Frank Miller, it's almost the first thing I think of, and it's all, like, it came back to that moment.
Yeah. So he goes to Dark Horse and starts, probably, like, his legacy of the 90s was creator-owned work.
Yep.
Both writing and drawing.
And Sin City was probably his most famous work. That at first appeared in Dark Horse Presents, which is their famous anthology, which launched so many big books that you think of now for creator-owned books, Concrete, things like that, first appeared in Dark Horse Presents. Sin City, which is here, this is the entire run, started then, which was just a story in Dark Horse Presents, and then led to how many of these, like 8 trades or something, like a ton of them. So started in '91, and his hard-boiled take on crime, noir stories,
grisly stuff.
In his really interesting, big-footed kind of
it blew
style.
me away as a junior high schooler when it came out.
We did a more in-depth episode on Sin City a little while back.
But
you should
still,
go back and check that out.
It's an important book for me. I mean, you take two of my favorite Batman stories ever. Great Ronin, Wolverine. I love the Daredevil stuff. Sin City. Frank Miller is one of my favorite creators of all time because this opened my eyes to non-DC Marvel stuff. Was Sin City?
Was it non-superhero stuff or
non-Marvel DC stuff together? I mean, it was like this guy who I love from Batman is doing this work over here. Well, I'll check it out. Oh,
this is crazy!
Wow,
I shouldn't be reading this.
I really shouldn't be reading this. There's boobs.
That's a nipple.
Yeah.
But
I did that a lot.
But it's also interesting because at the same time, again, going with this duality, he was writing and drawing Sin City, but also writing other projects with other artists. So, like at Dark Horse, he did his first project was Hard Boiled with Jeff Darrow, which if you've never seen,
it's crazy
detail, like amazing.
Crazy.
And then he started the Give Me Liberty or the Martha Washington series with Dave Gibbons, who was the artist on Watchmen.
I've never read that, and it's one of those ones that I've been like, I bet I should read that.
Yeah, probably.
But
he wasn't completely, didn't completely get away from his legacy. He returned back to Marvel for a little small period in 1993, where he did Daredevil, The Man Without Fear.
That, with John Romita Jr.
You think about the way that John Romita Jr. draws.
Yeah.
I see a lot of Frank Miller in that.
Especially if you see how John Romita Jr. evolved from the 80s to now.
Yeah.
Yes.
That blockiness, I suppose. Yeah. And when he's at his best, there's definitely an influence there, which is awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Of course, who didn't work with Todd McFarlane in the early 90s, he did an issue of Spawn.
Well, the first year, he had Alan Moore, he had Neil Gaiman.
Second year too,
that first period.
He thought he spent a lot on that baseball. I mean...
Yeah, so Frank Miller actually wrote Spawn number 11, which stands up as one of the best. Like, those runs of other people writing Spawn were the best issues.
They were, they were writers.
Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore, Grant Morrison later on. But so he did Spawn number 11, but that led to actually the...
much ballyhooed Spawn Batman crossover. The Spawn Batman and Batman Spawn. There was two different books.
One was published by Image, one was published by DC. Yeah. The DC one was very, very tame. While the Image one, I don't even remember who did the credits.
Frank Willard wrote them both.
Fred Willard?
Fred Willard. It was a
wow.
Frank Willard wrote them both, right?
It's Fred Willard here talking about Spawn and Batman.
I don't even remember the DC one, but I remember the Image one was drawn by McFarlane, and that was the one where what was great about that was it was in continuity.
Yeah.
Because it ends with Batman throwing a Batarang in Spawn's face, and then he has to stitch up his face, and that stitching stayed for like a year.
Yeah.
It was great. But anyway. But,
Spawn continuity.
It's Spawn continuity.
Right, as opposed to
Which
Batman.
means Batman is in Spawn. Anyway, so...
Whoa!
I know.
There's another lawsuit coming, and I don't think Todd can handle it. This is
heavy.
Yeah. So, but then... And then later on, for Dark Horse, he returned with Jeff Darrow, and they did Rusty the Robot and the
Big Guy and
Rusty the Robot, which became a cartoon.
Yes.
Did it?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, and Fox. Yeah.
I don't know anything.
Yeah.
Wasn't that based on the
Josh was in a
Astro
coma
Boy,
in the 90s.
That was
somewhat.
Yeah.
I mean, it was similar to.
I remember reading that, but like it was without. I want to say without context, but it was just really pretty to look at.
Yeah, it was huge. Yeah. And then in 1998, he writes and draws 300.
Now that's my favorite Frank Miller sort of piece. Yeah. For a while, when we first started the show, that was in my top 5. I don't know if it is anymore. Yeah. But it just like the way that the
it was horizontal.
Yeah. Like you read the comic book, it was a normal comic book, and if you all the pages were laid out sort of as a flat.
Well, it was that horizontal. You open the book like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. The trade, the collection.
Yeah. Well, the book was like that.
No, the comic book was. No, the comic book was.
Sure.
The comic book was standard, but then when they printed it, they printed the 2-page spreads flat across. And that was like the culmination of his ability in one little tiny short story. Like you took something that's sort of historical, but you said, you only have this much space to use, and him and Lynn Varley, who was his wife and partner at the time, like working at the top of her game, and he was, just doing amazing work. Yeah. He'd done all that Sin City, so he's had all the creative juices flowing, and as you know, it turned into a gigantic movie later, like a really successful movie, probably. Yeah, that was more successful than anything else he'd done.
And we'll talk about the movies, but 300 was probably more important because I think 300 is one of those movies that laid the groundwork for the movies we're seeing now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because Zack Snyder directed it and went on to Watchmen, and it was just like this whole idea of comic book adaptation. It doesn't have to be a superhero book and that sort of thing. So,
2 years later, he cracks the nascent internet in half when he announces a sequel to The Dark Knight Returns. Which
was very shaky then, though. So
you probably couldn't get me more excited for a comic book.
Do you remember that one image of the fist?
Yeah.
I mean, the DC had it with the. I remember San Diego in 2001. There was those bags.
Yeah.
It was they had for the retailers, and it was just that fist logo. It said DK2, and it was like, he's coming back. He's going to do it.
He comes back with The Dark Knight Strikes
again.
Dark Knight Strikes again.
Yeah. So
have you read it since then?
No.
It's much better.
Agreed.
I read it when the Absolute came out. I went through it and I read it again.
We talked about that on the show.
And I think that when in 2000, 2001, we were starting to get a market, a climate sort of like we have now. It's very small, it's very protective, and it doesn't tend to like a lot of shaking up. And what happened was that book came out, and it was just not what anybody expected. And
the coloring, I think, was the biggest.
The coloring was a big deal. They had Lynn Varley was still the colorist, but she was learning how to do.
But I think the bigger than the coloring, which was an issue, was it didn't look like The Dark Knight Returns.
Sure.
Klaus Janson wasn't inking it. It was Frank Miller's new style.
It was more advanced. Yeah, exactly.
So it didn't fit that world.
Sure.
For me, that was my biggest disconnect. Was there's a very distinct. I've read this Dark Knight Returns. Over 200 times. Right. There's a very distinct look and feel. Dark Knight Strikes Again is so different.
I would give it another read though, because the story actually, reading it years later, the story was better than I thought. I remember.
No, I just don't. The art. I mean, I like his art. It's just different, and I also can't get behind who the villain is.
Well, yeah. Well.
I will say, like, I went back and read it whenever that was out, maybe 3 years ago or whatever, and I was very surprised that I was like, wow, that really, it hung together a lot more than I thought it did. And I mean, it's a very DC-centric story. It doesn't love the characters, but it knows them.
Yeah.
You made one of the issues of Pick of the Week. Was that a joke? Can't remember.
No, that was, no.
It was
the first one was the issue, was Pick of the Week, and that was not a joke.
Right.
The first issue of All-Star Batman and Robin was the only...
Which is next project.
Negative/opposite Pick of the Week I've ever done, because I hated it.
Okay, in 2005, around then, DC announces the All-Star line. We talked about All-Star Superman before. Basically, a pared-down, pure version that creators can do outside of continuity. They announced Grant Morrison and Frank Whiteley Superman, and they announced Frank Miller and Jim Lee on Batman and Robin.
Amazing. Great.
That's going to sell some... That's going to move some units.
Move some units.
Goddamn Batman.
It comes out, and... Not what people were expecting.
No, it was a much more basically it's the story that it launched with was basically Robin joining Batman.
Well, the joke was it was like 6 issues of them driving to the Batcave. Now, I really liked the book because it took me about 2 issues to realize, all right, this is just him doing the Sin City version of Batman.
Yeah.
Like if, in my mind, in my own maker continuity way, I said, okay, this book takes place in Gotham City, in the Sin City world, which is down the street from Sin City itself.
Yeah.
So when that happened, and I placed it in that context, I loved the hell out of it.
You should do that for Dark Knight Strikes Again.
I might just sever it from the first one.
Well, we always go back to the, it was really slow to start, and Batman was way more grittier. And
he was that goddamn Batman.
But I still
meme.
I still go back to the issue number 7 with the Green Lantern issue.
No,
that was great.
I liked the series a lot. I just the delays killed it for me. But
so it got delayed. We haven't seen a new issue in years. And then last year at WonderCon they announced that they're going to bring it back February 2011, which is 6 years after it launched.
Hey, that's just passed.
Yeah.
Hey,
yeah.
It happened.
I didn't see that solicitation. Did you?
No, I haven't.
I enjoyed it. Very controversial. A lot of people didn't like it, but I did for different reasons. It's just different.
Part of the reason it might have been delayed is because Frank Miller decides about the mid-2000s to return to Hollywood after much denial of ever wanting to do a Sin City movie or anything like that. Robert Rodriguez takes it upon himself and just shoots a short story.
He shoves it down his throat.
And he shot with Josh Hartnett and shot a great little mini and got Frank Miller, sat him down and showed it to him. And Frank Miller was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. Mm-hmm. And so they then made the movie Sin City, which, some people liked. I liked it a lot. Yeah. I really enjoyed it.
I don't remember. Like, it didn't make... I saw it. It was fine, but I haven't thought about it since then.
Yeah, I really like it.
But I don't have the same connection to Sin City that you guys do.
Yeah.
But then, so that led to 300 getting made, which was awesome.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which was great.
I can't argue with that.
And then, now, Frank Miller got a co-directing credit with Robert Rodriguez for Sin City. And he didn't... Zack Snyder directed 300, but Frank Miller gets some confidence, and he says,
Well, it was a hit. Sin City was a hit. 300 was a hit, so...
I'm going to direct a movie.
Well, it's funny...
not only am I going to direct a movie, I'm going to direct Will Eisner's The Spirit.
Which isn't important to, there's only 800 people that's important to.
But Frank Miller's one of them, considering his connection with Will Eisner and all that sort of stuff,
I remember it was very funny, the lead up to the film, reading interviews with the people in the film, and they were all excited to work with Frank Miller, and I was like, you're not excited to work with Frank Miller.
Yeah.
Really? I love reading comic books.
Yeah.
No,
he's a genius. You don't know. I mean, it's just such, but I liked it, me and 4 other guys.
Yeah.
liked it.
You and Jill.
Why?
We talked about it in the audio show, but it is Frank Miller. If you read his dialogue out loud,
sure,
that is how it plays in the movie.
Yep.
And if you really like his style, it was perfect.
The problem with it was that I think a lot of people who were purists to Will Eisner and the Spirit,
but
it wasn't Will Eisner's The Spirit, it was Frank Miller's The Spirit.
But it was also Will Eisner's The Spirit. And a lot of guys who are actual purists went online and broke it down for you how it was actually Will Eisner's The Spirit.
I think that, again, his not problem, but the thing that the reaction to him is always has to do with expectation.
Yes,
I think that when you talk about All-Star Batman and Robin, the reason because it wasn't the thing I expected. When you talk about Dark Knight Strikes Again, it wasn't what you expected.
You know what,
the Spirit wasn't what people expected.
Since 300 came out in the late 90s, ever since then, he's had that problem.
Yeah.
Everything he's done has been a problem of expectation, not matching what actually.
Because I think
he's an echelon guy.
Basically his career has gone from star to superstar to legend.
Yes.
And then now anything after legend is really if you know how we work in America, it's fall.
Yes.
So like it's almost like he's got him down. Yeah, he's got this working against him.
So what's coming out next? Doing a sequel to 300 doing Xerxes.
Yep.
That's gonna be awesome. That's gonna be fantastic.
Now,
and then someday Batman Holy Terror.
And I don't have they cut the Batman part out. It's just gonna be Holy Terror.
Now it's the Fixer. Fixer versus Al Qaeda.
It's for me. It's kind of sad because he is one of my favorite guys, and the fact that he can't put anything out without the backlash because people almost enjoy the backlash more than they enjoy reading the actual work.
There's a real thing. Comic readers who came on in the last 10 years or so who weren't around so much in the 90s and weren't there when Alan Moore was putting stuff out, weren't there when Frank Miller was putting stuff out.
Yeah.
All they hear about is how these guys are amazing, and so when stuff comes out now, they're like, better blow me away, and they don't have a chance.
Yeah.
They also only see them in their quote-unquote crazy period.
Right.
Yeah.
People who only read comics the last 5 years don't know Alan Moore as much for being a great writer as they do him for being
a
witch.
And all they've been told is like how amazing he was, and they go back and they read it without the context, with the time. It may not seem as good. It's all that build up. You get the same thing with Frank Miller a little bit, but. At the same time, the things that are like he's put out a ton of work. We're building this list, But you can go back and read Batman Year One right now. You can read Dark Knight Returns.
Daredevil.
You read Daredevil, any of the Daredevil stories. It's all stands up. And
think about that one panel when he kills Elektra. Like, how many times have we seen that?
400.
What I just think is amazing, like we said, is that he set the temple for Batman for 20 years, set the temple for Daredevil for 20 years. We raved at Alex Maleev when he was on Daredevil about how he was drawing the rooftops and the water towers of Hell's Kitchen. Frank Miller did that 20 years before.
When it was actually dangerous. To
exactly.
On the rooftop.
Yeah, he sketching and all that sort of stuff. We talked. Would you have Ed Brubaker's Criminal and all this other noir stuff without Sin City laying the groundwork in the 90s? You know what I mean? Like, it really, the way he's reached out and touched the comic industry is a huge imprint.
And it's not hyperbole. We said it earlier. Yeah. The Daredevil you're reading now, the Batman you're reading now, for the most part, is Frank Miller's versions of those characters. It's not even 20 years, it's almost 25 years at this point. Yeah. That is... for me, if I'm making lists of the most important comic creators, he's in the top 20.
30
he's probably in the top 10.
Yeah, agreed.
I mean, it's 81. It's 30 years.
Yeah.
That's a long
time.
Shut
your whore mouth.
Oh. Anyway, so if you had any question about Frank Miller being important, this obviously addressed that. And if you question it, you're more than welcome to become my fanboy. Find the post of this video. Tell people why Frank Miller isn't as important as we're saying, and you'll probably get flamed by everyone else. But that's
you'll just be wrong.
Or Connor will just tell you you're wrong.
You'll be wrong. The fact of the matter is you're wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Contact at iFanboy.com is where you can write it in if you're too scared to write it on the website. And 888-FANBOYS 326-2697 is our voicemail.
And you can go to twitter.com/iFanboy. You can follow our updates, and you can follow us on there, iFanboy.com/about. And also, iFanboy is member-supported. You're the guys who make this happen. So if you want to help out, do your part, you can go to iFanboy.com/store, and you can sign up to become a member. And from that, you get all sorts of bonus. You'll get some free stuff and be eligible for some giveaways, and maybe you'll meet Stan Lee.
You never know.
It's happened.
It can happen.
To Hell and Back was not the strongest.
Well,
that was actually the only one I bought in issues, and I was like, when is this going to end?
And it's the longest one.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. 3, 2... I would be in so much trouble. 3, 2...
Bravo!
Your mom's the mom from Cake Boss.